Black CEO's mom kicked out of first class. She fired the entire crew moments later. "Ma'am, this is first class. Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" The voice sliced through the air like a knife, cold and sharp, coated with condescension. Evelyn Carter, 68, poised and draped in a faded navy tracksuit, looked up from her worn paperback, her brown eyes locking on the flight attendant hovering over her seat. "I beg your pardon," she asked calmly, though her voice betrayed a flicker of tension. Diane Whitmore, the attendant, didn't flinch. Her smile remained, tight, rehearsed, and anything but friendly. She gestured toward Evelyn's seat with a polite but pointed tone. "We just want to double-check. This section is reserved for premium customers. Could I see your boarding pass, please?" Evelyn had seen that look before. She knew exactly what it meant. She silently retrieved her phone, opened her digital boarding pass, and held it up with steady hands. "Seat 2A, confirmed. Bought and paid for." Diane glanced at it, then narrowed her eyes. Must have been a system error," she muttered before walking briskly down the aisle. Evelyn inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. The quiet rage that rose in her chest was all too familiar. She hadn't come here to cause trouble, but trouble had found her, again. This time, she promised herself, it would end differently. Hours earlier, the Denver International Airport had bustled like any other Thursday morning. Business travelers in sleek suits, couples headed to weekend getaways, and families herding toddlers toward gates. Amid the swarm, Evelyn moved quietly. Simple sneakers, a sweatshirt faded from years of wash, a battered leather backpack slung over one shoulder. On her wrist, a delicate silver bracelet, the last gift from her late husband. She looked like any other senior citizen traveling alone, if you didn't know who she was, and no one did. That was the plan. Her son, Xavier Carter, the billionaire CEO of Nova Sky Technologies and the new majority owner of Skyward Airlines, had begged her for years to let him send a private jet or at least book her under VIP status. She always refused. Xavier had fought his way up from the south side of Chicago to the top of the tech world, and Evelyn never wanted his success to be used as a shield from reality. She wanted to see the world as it was, even if that meant facing its ugliness head-on. Today, her flight to Boston was supposed to be uneventful. A visit to the city where she and her late husband had lived when Xavier was a baby. A sentimental trip, quiet, peaceful. But the universe had other plans. As she boarded Flight 221, the moment her sneaker touched the carpet of the first-class cabin, she felt the shift. 3 flight attendants, Diane, Richard, and their supervisor, Lauren, exchanged looks as if someone had tracked mud onto their marble floor. Lauren's voice was icy when she greeted her. "First-class passengers only, ma'am." "I'm a first-class passenger," Evelyn replied without hesitation. Lauren blinked. "Oh, I see. Welcome aboard, then." But the welcome was anything but warm. Now, seated in 2A, Evelyn felt the weight of eyes on her. A white man in a tailored blazer across the aisle openly stared. A young brunette further back whispered to her husband. One by one, their curiosity turned to skepticism. What's she doing here? And just like that, Evelyn was reminded, again, how many people in this country measured worth by clothing, skin, and assumption. Richard, the tall, blonde male attendant, leaned over from the service station. "Lauren wants to make sure all IDs match the tickets for today's flight. You understand, of course." "No, I don't," Evelyn answered. "I've flown first class on this airline before, and never been asked for ID mid-flight." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable now that she wasn't playing along. "It's just protocol, ma'am." "Then why isn't anyone else being asked?" Evelyn asked, voice firm but still composed. There was a pause, then silence. That was the beginning. As the aircraft taxied for takeoff, Lauren hovered nearby, pretending to adjust the curtain separating first class from economy. Her eyes darted toward Evelyn repeatedly. Her body language screamed irritation. But Evelyn refused to budge. She flipped her book open again, pretending to read while her mind raced through a million thoughts. How far will they push this? Should she say something now? Or wait? The real answer came minutes after takeoff, when Diane returned. This time, she didn't come alone. Behind her stood a younger male crew member, eyes wide with tension. Diane's voice was falsely sweet. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we've received a report that your ticket may have been part of a duplicate booking error. We'll need to move you to the back cabin temporarily while we verify with ground control." The words burned into her like acid. Evelyn closed her book. She looked up, not trembling, not angry, just done. "No," she said. "Excuse me." Diane blinked. "You heard me," Evelyn said, her voice low but firm. "I'm not moving. I paid for this seat, and I have the receipt and boarding pass to prove it." Lauren now joined, eyes hard. "Ma'am, you're creating a disturbance. We're going to need to ask you to cooperate." Evelyn stood, slowly, and looked Lauren square in the eyes. "The only disturbance here is your prejudice, and believe me, I know exactly what this is." Lauren's face darkened, but before she could respond, a ripple ran through the cabin. From the back of the plane, a deep voice echoed, "Is there a problem here?" All heads turned. A tall black man in an impeccable charcoal suit stood in the aisle, his carry-on still slung over his shoulder. Broad shoulders, sharp eyes, a presence that demanded attention. Evelyn's lips curled into a tiny, knowing smile. "Xavier," she said softly. "Mom," he replied, stepping forward. His eyes didn't leave Lauren's face. "Is everything okay?" Lauren froze. Her throat moved, but no words came. Richard paled. Diane took a step back. Xavier turned his eyes to Diane, then Lauren. "This woman is Evelyn Carter." "My mother," he said, calmly, yet with a weight that made everyone around take a breath. Dead silence. And then something broke. Xavier reached into his blazer, pulled out his Nova Sky executive badge, and tapped it. "I'm also the owner of this airline, and I want to know, right now, why the hell my mother was nearly thrown out of a first-class seat she paid for." Lauren stammered. We didn't know. Her appearance, it was just a misunderstanding." "Wrong answer," Xavier cut in. "And it's not just a misunderstanding when it happens to people like her, again and again." He pulled out his phone. "This ends now. The entire cabin crew, consider yourselves suspended, effective immediately. You'll be removed when we land." Diane gasped. Richard's face turned white. Lauren's hands began to tremble. Evelyn didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She just turned back to her seat, calm and regal, and sat down like the queen she had always been. Outside the window, the sun burst through the clouds. Inside the plane, everything had changed, forever. The tension in the cabin hadn't faded. If anything, it thickened. As the plane sailed through the sky, Evelyn Carter sat quietly by the window, her hands folded in her lap. The light from outside flickered over her silver bracelet. But inside her, a storm was brewing, equal parts grief and clarity. She hadn't expected to see Xavier on this flight, and certainly not in that moment. After his explosive reveal, the first-class cabin had plunged into a stunned silence. Not a single flight attendant approached Evelyn again. Lauren had disappeared behind the curtain to make a phone call that changed her life. Diane stood frozen like a statue at the front galley. Richard, he didn't even make eye contact. But Xavier, he never sat down. Instead, he stayed standing in the aisle next to his mother, towering over the entire front cabin like a man holding court. And in a way, he was. "I need the name of the supervisor at this gate in Denver," he said, pulling up his internal employee portal. And I want passenger complaint records for Flight 221 for the last 6 months. Now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone alone was enough to make people move. Meanwhile, Evelyn watched him with quiet pride, but her heart was heavy. "You didn't have to do all that," she finally said, breaking the silence between them. Xavier looked down, surprised. "Didn't have to? Mom, they tried to throw you out of first class." She nodded slowly. "Yes, they did. But you stepping in, it's going to turn this into a headline, and I wasn't ready for that." Xavier sat down across from her, still wound tight with frustration. "I don't care what it turns into. You were disrespected in front of everyone. They looked at you and saw someone who didn't belong, and that's on me. That's my company, my people." "You're not responsible for their ignorance," Evelyn said gently. "But I am," he shot back. "At least partially. I built this company with a vision, respect, fairness, inclusion. And if my own crew can't see that in practice, then I've failed." Evelyn placed her hand on his. "No, Xavier. You didn't fail. But now you have to choose. Do you just fire them and move on? Or do you use this moment to dig deeper, to fix the parts of your airline you never saw before?" Her words hung in the air. He didn't answer right away. From across the aisle, a young black woman leaned forward. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carter?" Evelyn turned toward her. "Yes? I just wanted to say thank you for not backing down. I saw what they did. I felt it too." "What's your name, dear?" Evelyn asked. "Monica. Monica Bell. I'm just a marketing manager. I fly often, and every time I sit in this cabin, I brace myself, wondering if someone's going to ask why I'm here." Evelyn smiled softly. "I know that feeling." Monica's voice cracked. "You made me feel like I wasn't crazy, like I'm not alone." The two women shared a look that needed no translation. Two souls bonded by the quiet, exhausting battle of proving they belonged. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Diane was whispering furiously into the phone with HR. Her voice shook as she pleaded with the supervisor on the other end. "No, I didn't know she was his mother. I was just following standard procedures. You know how many people sneak into first class?" The voice on the other end was cold. "Diane, the issue isn't whether you knew. The issue is that you assumed she didn't belong, and that assumption has now turned into a PR nightmare." "But I was just doing my job," Diane insisted. "I swear I didn't mean any harm." "You'll have a chance to explain when you land, but I'm telling you now, this is serious. Mr. Carter is demanding a full internal audit of every discrimination complaint filed in the last 2 years, starting today." Back in first class, Evelyn leaned her head against the window. The sky beyond was quiet, peaceful. But inside she felt the weight of something bigger building, not just her story, but the story of all the people like Monica. All the quiet humiliations, all the "are you sure this is your seat?" questions, all the skeptical glances. Xavier turned to her again. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting when we land," he said. "Not just to address this crew, but to initiate real reform. I want this company scrubbed from the top down." Evelyn gave him a long look. "And I want you standing next to me when I do," Xavier added. She hesitated. "You sure that's wise?" He nodded. "I'm not asking you to hide anymore. You've always told me we can't fight what we don't face." She smiled. "That does sound like something I'd say." Then came the captain's voice overhead, breaking the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Boston shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The rest of the flight passed in silence, but the battle lines had been drawn. When the plane landed, the media was already waiting at Logan Airport. Word had leaked somehow. A handful of reporters clustered near the private exit for corporate partners. flashes ready. Evelyn remained calm. Xavier shielded her as best he could, but one question cut through the crowd. "Miss Carter, how does it feel to be discriminated against on your own son's airline?" Evelyn paused, then turned slowly to face them. "I'd say it feels familiar," she said, "but this time I'm not going to let it slide." And with that, she and her son disappeared into the waiting car. The headlines the next day would explode across every platform. Black CEO's mom kicked out of first class, firings imminent. But the real story? It hadn't even begun yet. By the time Evelyn stepped into her hotel suite in Boston, the headlines had already gone viral. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Texts, emails, missed calls, a wave of attention she neither asked for nor wanted. But this wasn't about her anymore. She placed her small carry-on bag down gently by the couch and walked over to the large window overlooking downtown Boston. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, dignified, but undeniably resolute. Behind her, Xavier stood motionless, scanning through his inbox on his phone. "They're spiraling," he said finally, voice low. "Internal communications are on fire. The PR team wants to release a neutral statement. You know, the usual corporate fluff about her training and reviewing protocols." Evelyn didn't turn around. "And what are you going to tell them?" "That if they're still thinking about optics right now, they're the problem." He walked over to the table and dropped his phone down, rubbing his temples. "You okay?" he asked. She turned. "That depends. Are you about to make this about fixing your brand or fixing your company?" Xavier stared at her. "Because those aren't the same thing," she added. He exhaled. "I want to burn it all down and rebuild it. That's the truth." "You sure you're ready for that?" Evelyn asked. "Because you'll make enemies, people who liked you silent." "I've been ready since I watched you get humiliated for daring to sit in a seat you paid for," he said. "But you're right. I can't do this from the top down, not this time." She walked over, sat on the edge of the coffee table across from him. Her eyes were calm but firm. "Then you have to start by making them see you as a son, not just a CEO." He nodded slowly. "I need you at the meeting." She shook her head once. "Number, you don't need me there to protect you. You need me there so they see who they hurt." The next morning, Summit Airlines headquarters was tense. Security was tighter than usual. Most executives had received the same cryptic invite: emergency culture review meeting, attendance mandatory. Some arrived nervous, others annoyed. A few speculated this was just another PR drill. But all of that changed the moment they saw Evelyn Carter walk into the executive conference room. She wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a clean navy dress, modest heels, and that silver bracelet that never left her wrist. Her presence alone changed the air in the room. Whispers began immediately. "Is that... Oh my God, that's his mother. Wait, she's the woman from the video." When Xavier entered minutes later, the room stood, not from respect, but from sheer uncertainty. No one knew what to expect. "Thank you for being here," he began, standing behind the long oak table that usually held board documents and performance charts. Today it held nothing but truth. "I won't waste your time. Yesterday, my mother, Evelyn Carter, was removed from her first-class seat on one of our flights. Not because of a mistake, not because of a safety issue, but because 3 of our crew members didn't believe someone who looks like her belonged there." Murmurs spread across the room. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others glanced around, seeking an ally in their discomfort. "I'm not here today as your CEO," Xavier continued. "I'm here as her son, and as a black man who built this airline with the belief that we could be different." He stepped aside. "Mom, would you like to speak?" Evelyn stood slowly. She didn't clear her throat or adjust her posture. She just looked around the room with eyes that had seen too much for too long. I'm not here to shame you, she said. I'm here to make you feel what I felt. Not just yesterday, but for decades. Silence. I sat in that seat and was treated like I didn't belong. Not because I did something wrong, but because I didn't look like your average first-class passenger. And when I showed my ticket, I was still doubted. When I showed my ID, I was still questioned. They didn't want proof. They wanted me gone. She paused, letting that land. And the worst part? This wasn't new. This wasn't shocking. It was familiar. One of the executives raised her hand timidly. Mrs. Carter, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how that must have felt. Evelyn gave a sad smile. I appreciate that. But I don't need imagination. I need action. Xavier stepped forward again. Starting today, he said, Summit Airlines is undergoing a full internal audit. Every discrimination complaint, every bias-related review, every case quietly labeled as a misunderstanding. He let that sink in. And there will be consequences, not just for the crew, but for any leader who signed off on culture that allowed this to happen. Another executive, a man in his late 50s named Harold, shifted in his seat. With all due respect, Xavier, this sounds like a witch hunt. Every company has bias problems. We train, we correct, we move on. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. You think this is a witch hunt? Try being hunted by doubt every time you walk into a room. The room went still. I'm not asking you to fire people for the sake of headlines, Xavier said, but I am telling you, if you don't change this now from the inside out, we'll lose more than passengers. We'll lose our soul. Harold tried to interject again, but Xavier cut him off. If anyone feels uncomfortable being held accountable for bias, feel free to leave. I won't stop you, but don't expect to keep your position. No one moved, and that was when the twist came. Evelyn stepped away from the front of the room and opened a slim folder she had brought with her. These are not just stories, she said. These are real people. 37 reports of discriminatory treatment by flight crew in the past 6 months. 29 of them involved black or brown passengers. Most were dismissed, quietly, buried. She handed the folder to HR Director Maria Lopez, who flipped through the pages with increasing disbelief. Your policies don't need rewriting, Evelyn said. Your people do. And just like that, the meeting had shifted. This was no longer about damage control. It was a reckoning. When the session ended, no one rushed out. They sat in their chairs, humbled, quiet. As Xavier and Evelyn walked out together, she leaned toward him and said quietly, Now it's your turn to lead. He nodded once. But as they reached the hallway, Diane, the flight attendant from the plane, was waiting. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I was wrong, she whispered. I was so wrong. I didn't see you. I only saw what I was afraid of. Evelyn paused. You can't take back what happened, but you can decide who you'll be tomorrow. Diane nodded. I'd like to try. And for the first time since the incident began, Evelyn reached out, gently touching Diane's arm. I hope you do. Outside, reporters waited, but inside Summit Airlines, change had begun to take root, and Evelyn Carter wasn't just a name anymore. She was the storm that broke the silence. The cold, sterile walls of Summit Airlines' HR department had never felt so tense. The usual buzz of corporate chatter had been replaced with the uneasy silence of reckoning. Evelyn Carter sat calmly in a leather chair across from Maria Lopez, the Director of Human Resources. Between them sat the same folder Evelyn had presented in the meeting earlier that morning. Maria's hands rested on it now, trembling slightly. I knew we had issues, Maria whispered, but I didn't know it was this deep. You knew enough, Evelyn replied, her voice gentle but unflinching. You just didn't look hard enough. Maria looked up, her eyes filled with something between shame and helplessness. So, what now? Evelyn leaned forward. Now you decide who you want to be, the person who signed off on silence, or the one who helps rebuild this place. Across the building, Diane, the flight attendant who had humiliated Evelyn on the plane, stood outside a conference room with her hands clasped tightly. Inside, a panel of senior HR staff and legal counsel waited for her testimony. She was terrified, not because she feared being fired, she expected that, but because the weight of what she'd done was finally crashing down. The night before, she had scrolled through news headlines and social media posts, reading people's stories. Some were angry, others were deeply personal. A few were heartbreakingly familiar. Her own mother had raised her to treat everyone with respect. But somewhere along the line, training manuals and status codes had taught her to measure people by how they dressed, how they walked, how much they looked like they belonged. And Evelyn Carter hadn't looked like someone important to her. She stepped into the room. Across from her sat a small committee, including Maria Lopez and Xavier Bennett himself. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make Diane's throat tighten. "We'd like to hear your full account of what happened on Flight 3482, Maria said, opening a notepad. Diane's voice cracked at first, but steadied as she continued. "I saw her and assumed she was in the wrong seat," Diane confessed. "She didn't look like a first-class passenger. That's all I saw. Not her face, not her eyes. Just a sweatshirt and a backpack." "Did she raise her voice?" Maria asked. She was polite, calm. She showed her ticket right away. "And yet you still questioned her?" Diane nodded slowly, shame flooding her voice. "Yes. And when she pushed back, even respectfully, I went to Caroline." Xavier's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of that name. "She told me not to worry, that we were just doing our job. But I knew, deep down, I knew we were wrong." Maria leaned in. "You knew it wasn't protocol to ask for ID once the boarding pass was confirmed." Diane hesitated, then nodded. "We only do that if there's suspicious behavior or an alert from the system." Neither applied here. Xavier finally spoke, his voice cool, clipped. "Do you believe you treated her differently because of her race?" Diane's throat tightened, her eyes welled. "Yes." Silence hung heavy. Xavier closed his eyes for a long second. Then he stood. "You'll be reassigned immediately, not as punishment, but as education." She blinked, stunned. "You're going to spend 3 months on the community engagement team," he said. "You'll sit with people like my mother, people who've had to fight for every ounce of dignity. You'll hear their stories. You'll serve them." He paused. "And when you're done, you'll report back, not just on what you've learned, but how you plan to make sure no one under your influence ever acts the way you did." Diane could barely speak. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Xavier didn't smile. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for every person who looked like my mother and never got the chance to speak." Outside the room, Caroline paced the hallway in heels too sharp for the slick marble floor. Her face, usually frozen in a mask of control, now showed cracks. Real ones. Desperation. Panic. She had watched the headlines snowball. She had heard whispers from staff. And now she'd been summoned. But unlike Diane, she wasn't ready to admit fault. She stepped into the room, eyes scanning for some shred of support. Xavier's expression was stone. "Sit," Maria instructed. Caroline did. "What happened on Flight 3482? Maria asked. Caroline smoothed the fabric of her blazer. "A procedural misunderstanding. Our crew followed escalation protocol when a passenger's boarding seemed questionable." "And what made it questionable?" Xavier asked flatly. Caroline didn't blink. "The discrepancy in appearance. We're trained to identify anomalies. She stood out." Maria's pen froze mid-stroke. "So you made assumptions based on how she looked," Xavier pressed. Caroline's jaw clenched. I made a judgment call based on patterns. We've had incidents in the past where she had a ticket, Xavier snapped. She had her ID. She followed every rule. The only anomaly was her skin and her clothes. Caroline flinched but didn't back down. With all due respect, sir, we're constantly told to protect the brand, the integrity of First Class. Xavier leaned forward, eyes burning. She is the brand. She is the integrity. Caroline's lips parted, but no words came. He stood. You're suspended indefinitely. Your behavior violated the core of everything this company was built on. The fact that you still don't see that tells me everything I need to know. Caroline's face paled. She opened her mouth to protest, but the room was already moving on. She was irrelevant now. When she exited the conference room, Evelyn stood in the hallway. Their eyes met. Caroline froze. You thought no one would ever see, Evelyn said softly, but here I am. Caroline lowered her gaze and walked away, her heels suddenly echoing with a hollowness they had never carried before. As the day came to a close, Xavier stood in front of the entire staff in the main auditorium. Hundreds of employees gathered, many watching the live feed from remote offices. Evelyn stood beside him, her presence dignified. This is not the end, Xavier said, voice strong. It's the beginning of a cultural shift. One that will hurt, one that will expose our flaws, but one that is long overdue. He glanced at his mother. She reminded me of something. That silence is complicity, and starting today we won't be silent anymore. Applause erupted, not polite but powerful, not performative but real. And somewhere in the back, Diane stood among her peers, no longer sure of her place, but willing, finally, to earn one. The fallout had begun. But so had the rebuilding. The boardroom on the top floor of Bennett Tower was filled with a rare kind of silence, the kind that signaled both anticipation and dread. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago, but no one dared glance away from the center of the room. Olivia Carter stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, facing the 20 board members of Bennett Aerospace Group and Summit Airlines, her presence quiet yet commanding. Next to her, Xavier Bennett remained seated, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. But this time it was not Xavier who would lead the conversation. It was Olivia. She looked around the room. Seasoned executives, VPs in suits that cost more than her monthly retirement income, some curious, others visibly uneasy. She had seen those expressions before, on the flight, in lobbies, at check-in counters. Now she faced them not as a faceless passenger in worn sneakers, but as the mother of the CEO and a woman finally ready to speak. You all know what happened, Olivia began, her voice clear, unshaken. What you may not understand is why it matters beyond the headlines. Some shifted in their seats. A few lowered their eyes. She gave them no reprieve. When I walked into that cabin, I was judged in under 5 seconds, she said. Not because I was unruly, not because I violated any rule, but because I didn't look like someone worthy of that space. That judgment came from your employees. But let's be honest. It started here. She let the silence linger, each second pressing heavier than the last. You want to build a brand rooted in excellence, but how can you call anything excellent when the people representing it treat others with contempt? Board member Glenn Reeves, a former airline executive with decades in the industry, cleared his throat. Miss Carter, I agree with you in principle, but we have diversity policies in place. Our DEI training sessions, the company statements. We've made those investments. Olivia turned toward him, her voice calm but sharp. Statements don't change systems. People do. The room tensed. And with all due respect, Mr. Reeves, those policies didn't stop Caroline from humiliating me. They didn't stop Richard from smirking as I was asked to leave my seat, and they didn't stop Diane from assuming I didn't belong. The problem isn't what's written on the company brochure, it's what's accepted in the break rooms, on the tarmac, in the cabins. Xavier watched his mother with quiet pride. He had seen her challenge systems before, in city council meetings, at PTA fundraisers, even in courtrooms during the early days of his father's legal battles. But this was different. This was her voice reclaiming the space it had always deserved. Board member Angela Young leaned forward. "So, what do you propose, Miss Carter?" Olivia didn't hesitate. "A full audit of hiring, training, and performance evaluation protocols. Bring in independent experts, not internal ones. Establish a whistleblower hotline staffed outside your HR department. Create real consequences, not performative reprimands. And most importantly, make sure the people making these decisions reflect the communities you claim to serve." A few board members glanced at Xavier. He remained silent, letting his mother own the moment. Angela nodded slowly. "That would be disruptive." Olivia smiled. "So is humiliation. So is racial profiling. So is a company being dragged through the press because it couldn't protect its passengers' dignity." The words landed hard. Then, to everyone's surprise, Glenn Reeves leaned back and gave a slow, measured nod. "She's right. We've been managing optics, not impact." Another board member added, "If we had listened earlier, we wouldn't be having this conversation after a scandal." For the first time that day, Xavier spoke. "I've decided to greenlight all the recommendations my mother just outlined. We'll bring in an independent civil rights consultancy next week. This board will be expected to attend a mandatory training series starting next month, and all executive compensation packages, including mine, will now tie into measurable equity outcomes." The room buzzed. A junior board member, Nathan Tran, raised an eyebrow. "Even yours?" Xavier looked him square in the eye. "Especially mine." Just then, the door opened quietly. An assistant stepped in, eyes wide, voice low. "Mr. Bennett, there's someone downstairs you may want to see. She says her name is Teresa James." Xavier frowned. "Who?" "Apparently, she's the mother of a young man who was denied boarding last year because his ID didn't match his appearance, according to staff. She's here with documentation, and she's angry." Olivia turned, her face suddenly solemn. Xavier nodded to the assistant. "Bring her up." A few minutes later, Teresa James entered the boardroom, her energy like a bolt of electricity. Dressed in a navy coat with an envelope clutched tightly in her hand, she didn't wait for permission. "My son, Malik, was 16, she said, her voice shaking. He was traveling to visit his grandmother in Phoenix. He had his school ID, his itinerary, everything in order. But your agent said, and I quote, 'He didn't look like a Malik James. He missed the flight.'" The room was stunned. "I filed a complaint," Teresa continued. "Never heard back. Not a call, not an apology, just silence." Xavier stood. "I'm sorry. I had no idea." "You do now." Olivia stepped forward. "Miss James, please stay. Your story needs to be part of this conversation." Teresa exhaled, her voice softer now. "Thank you. I didn't come here to shout. I just want someone to listen, to do something." Xavier glanced at the board. "This is exactly why reform is no longer optional, and it won't be a one-time fix. Starting next week, we're holding public listening forums. Not just press events, real discussions with passengers who've been harmed. You'll hear them. We all will." One by one, board members nodded, but it wasn't just for show, because something real had shifted in that room. And for the first time in years, Olivia felt it, not just hope, but momentum. Real change was finally underway, and she wouldn't stop until it reached every last row, every last airport, every last forgotten voice. The next morning, the entire headquarters of Summit Airlines pulsed with energy, unlike anything seen before. Employees moved briskly through glass hallways, eyes locked on emails marked urgent, gossip echoing in hushed voices at every water cooler. The company's internal communication had just confirmed what many had only whispered the night before. Today there would be a mandatory all-staff assembly, in person, in the main auditorium, no exceptions. In a sleek black SUV, Xavier Bennett sat beside his mother in silence. Olivia looked out the window, watching the Chicago skyline zip past. Though her face was calm, her thoughts churned with emotion. She had never imagined she'd become the catalyst for change inside her son's company, let alone the face of it. But she was no longer just someone's mother. She was the story. The car pulled into the underground garage of Bennett Tower, and within minutes, mother and son were walking side by side down a hallway lined with posters of Summit's latest campaigns. First class for all. Elevate your journey. Olivia slowed slightly in front of one that showed a sleek jet with a smiling, racially diverse cabin crew. She murmured, almost to herself, "Pretty picture. Shame it took all this to mean something." Xavier placed a steady hand on her back. "It'll mean something now, Mom, because you're about to tell them why." The auditorium was packed. More than 700 employees, pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, regional managers, janitorial staff, all sat shoulder to shoulder in tightly arranged rows. Every screen in the room was lit with Summit's blue logo. A low murmur filled the air. People knew this was big. They just didn't know how big. When Xavier walked out onto the stage, a hush fell. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence work for him. Then he raised his eyes and began. "Good morning. I called you here today because something unacceptable happened on one of our flights. And no, this isn't going to be another PR-safe apology wrapped in legal disclaimers." He paused, looking around the room. "My mother, Olivia Carter, was humiliated by our own staff in the first-class cabin of a Summit flight. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she didn't look like someone who belongs there." A few gasps, some murmurs. People were already putting it together. "And what makes it worse is that some of you might have heard the story and thought, well, she's the CEO's mother. That's why it's a big deal. But you're missing the point." He motioned to the side of the stage. "She's not here today as my mother. She's here as a woman who was mistreated. A black woman who's endured these microaggressions her entire life, and this time it happened in our house." Olivia stepped into view. She wore a charcoal pantsuit, elegant and modest, her silver hair pulled back. The auditorium seemed to hold its breath. She walked to the microphone and for a moment said nothing, just stood. Then, slowly, she began. "I want you to close your eyes and imagine something. You've worked hard, saved your money, booked a ticket. You're tired but excited. You finally get on your flight, ready to relax. But before you even sit down, 3 people look at you like you're trash." A few people shifted in their seats. One of them questions your ticket. Another pretends there's a system error. And the third smiles while asking you to leave your seat until things can be verified. Not because you were loud or aggressive or drunk, but because you're wearing sneakers and your skin is brown. Now the room was silent. You think this is rare? It's not. I know dozens of people who've had similar experiences. The only reason you're hearing my story is because of who my son is. That's the truth. But what about the people who don't have Xavier, who don't have power or headlines or platforms? She looked directly at the crew section where flight attendants sat in full uniform. Are they just expected to sit quietly and swallow that pain? A flight attendant in the 3rd row, a woman in her late 20s, raised her hand and stood before anyone could stop her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I wasn't there that day, but I've seen things, heard them too. Sometimes we joke, call someone a coach class in disguise if they don't look the part. I never thought, I thought it was harmless. Olivia didn't blink. And now? The woman lowered her head. Now I know it's not. Another voice came from the back. I was the gate agent for that flight. I didn't stop them, said a man in a Summit polo shirt. I saw what was happening and told myself it wasn't my business. Olivia stepped forward. But it is. Silence is complicity. It always has been. Xavier returned to the microphone. Starting next week, Summit will launch a series of mandatory trainings. But this isn't just about education. It's about culture. Our core values. Every employee, from executives to part-time ground staff, will be evaluated not just by their performance, but by how they uphold dignity, equity, and inclusion. The screen behind them changed. A headline appeared. Summit reforms dignity first. Xavier continued, and that's not all. I've personally requested that the employees involved in my mother's incident be reassigned. Not fired yet, but moved to economy service for a probationary period. Let them see, feel, and learn. A murmur of approval swept the crowd. It wasn't vengeance, it was restoration. Olivia added, I don't want apologies. I want growth. I want every black woman, every working-class person, every elder, every outsider who steps onto your planes to be treated like they matter. She turned slowly, letting her gaze fall over the crowd. Because they do. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Some stood, others wiped tears. Xavier stepped beside her, offering a simple nod. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt something she hadn't expected from this fight. Belief. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. 3 months had passed since Olivia Carter stood before the entire staff of Summit Airlines and challenged them to see the truth, to look in the mirror and confront their own biases. The ripples of that moment had turned into waves. Inside Summit's sprawling training center just outside Chicago, a group of new hires was gathered for orientation. On the wall hung a new mission statement, printed in bold black letters. Respect isn't a luxury, it's the baseline. Beneath it was a framed photograph of Olivia and Xavier, standing shoulder to shoulder, flanked by the employees who had helped rebuild the company's new equity program. Among them, unexpectedly, was Richard. Richard Monroe hadn't slept the night before, not because of nerves or anxiety, but because today he wasn't showing up as the man who once sneered at Olivia Carter's presence in first class. Today, he was returning as a speaker, an example of redemption in action. The irony wasn't lost on him. The audience in the training hall was made up of flight attendants, ground crew, and gate agents, many of whom had never heard his name. But Richard wasn't there to tell them what to think. He was there to tell them who he used to be. My name is Richard Monroe. I've worked in aviation for almost a decade, he began, standing in front of the room with his hands clasped tightly behind his back. And 3 months ago, I nearly lost everything because I refused to see someone for who they were. He paused, searching the faces in front of him. I saw an older black woman step into first class, and instead of offering her a smile or even basic respect, I questioned her. Her ticket, her worth, because she didn't look the part. Silence filled the room. He could feel it land like a weight. But here's what I've learned. Discrimination isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up in double standards. In the questions we ask some people but not others. In the way we smirk instead of serve. A woman in the second row raised her hand. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, with long braids and skeptical eyes. Why didn't you get fired? She asked bluntly. Richard didn't flinch. I should have. And for a moment I thought I would. But Xavier Bennett believed that punishment doesn't always lead to change. Sometimes humility does. So he reassigned me. Economy class. Every flight, every row, every passenger. He cracked a small smile. Let me tell you, there's no room to feel superior when you're helping a single mom juggle 3 kids and a car seat in row 32. Laughter rippled across the room, but Richard's face sobered quickly. It's in those moments, face to face with people I used to overlook, that I realized how wrong I'd been. And the truth is, most people I treated like second-class citizens never had the luxury of speaking up. He looked up, locking eyes with the young woman who'd questioned him. They deserved better, and now I make it my mission to be better, for them and for every passenger that boards our planes. Later that afternoon, as Richard stepped out of the training center, he found himself facing a familiar figure seated on a bench beneath the oak tree by the courtyard. Olivia. "You still owe me a good cup of coffee," she said with a warm smile. He chuckled nervously, walking over to join her. "I was wondering if I'd ever see you again outside of a headline." "I came to see if what I did actually mattered," she said, watching him. "It's easy to give a speech, harder to change." He met her gaze. "It mattered. More than you know." There was a long, quiet beat between them. "I used to think I understood people," he admitted. "But I didn't even understand myself. That day on the plane, I saw a woman I judged instantly. And now, I see someone who changed everything, for me and a whole damn airline." Olivia looked toward the sky, her voice soft. "It wasn't just for you. It was for the girl at the gate who gets questioned one too many times, the grandfather who gets ignored in business class, the tired mom who's never offered help with her stroller." Then she turned, her gaze piercing but kind. "But if you're standing here today, different than who you were, then maybe we're starting to get somewhere." He nodded, his throat tight. "I still have a long way to go," he said. "So do we all," she replied. "But you're walking, and that counts." Just as they stood, a familiar voice called from across the courtyard. "Mom?" Xavier jogged up, suit jacket slung over his shoulder, expression proud. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, glancing at Richard. "He do all right?" Olivia smiled, slipping her arm through her son's. "He's learning." Richard watched them walk away, his heart full of something unfamiliar and grounding. Hope. Real change didn't happen in press releases or training manuals. It happened in uncomfortable conversations, long looks in the mirror, and in people like Olivia, who dared to challenge the system, and in people like him, who finally listened. The late morning sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of JFK International's Terminal 4, casting golden streaks across the polished floors. The Summit Airlines check-in counter buzzed with its usual rhythm, but behind it all, something deeper had shifted, a quiet but unmistakable hum of change. Olivia Carter stood at gate B26, a soft smile on her face as she looked around. It had been 6 months since the flight that had changed everything, not just for her, but for an entire industry. Today she was flying again, first class, Summit Airlines. But this time it wasn't about reclaiming a seat or proving a point. It was about witnessing the change she had fought for finally take root. As she boarded, passengers smiled at her, not in recognition, but in respect. A young white woman with a service dog gave her a polite nod. A Latino father with 2 kids waved when his daughter said hello to her. There were no sideways glances, no whispers behind her back. Just quiet acknowledgement. That was all she had ever wanted. When Olivia reached her seat, she found it already prepared. A small linen pillow, a glass of water with lemon, and a handwritten note resting on the armrest. The handwriting was neat, slightly slanted. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for what you've done. You didn't just change a flight, you changed us. Mia, cabin crew." She smiled and looked up. Mia, a young flight attendant in her early 20s, stood nearby, her face open and sincere. Olivia motioned her over. How long have you been with Summit? She asked gently. Only a few months, Mia replied, visibly nervous. But before that, I worked somewhere else. Let's just say, the energy here feels different. People notice things now. They listen. Olivia nodded slowly. And what about you? What have you noticed? Mia hesitated for a beat, then said quietly, I notice that I think twice before making assumptions. And when I see something unfair, I speak up, even if it's uncomfortable. That's where it starts, Olivia said, with the ones who notice and choose to act. Across the aisle, Richard Monroe walked down the cabin, assisting an elderly Asian couple with their bags. He caught Olivia's eye, nodded respectfully, and returned to his duties. The arrogance was gone. What remained was humility, sincerity, growth. Later, mid-flight, the captain came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Samuel Green. Just a quick note of thanks today. You're flying with Summit Airlines, where we now stand on values stronger than steel: equality, dignity, and respect for all. That shift started because of a very special woman on board, Mrs. Olivia Carter. This flight is for you. The cabin erupted into polite applause. Some passengers looked her way, others simply smiled without making a fuss. Olivia sat quietly, her hand over her heart, eyes moist but steady. She hadn't done it for the praise. She had done it for the silence, silence that no longer held prejudice, but peace. 3 months later, Olivia sat in the front row at the National Equity in Aviation Summit in Washington, D.C. On stage stood her son, Xavier Bennett, his voice echoing through the grand auditorium. My mother's quiet defiance taught us that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, but the world still listens. Behind him, a video played, snapshots of diverse passengers boarding flights, employees engaging in training workshops, real stories of people who once felt invisible now being seen. Summit Airlines is no longer just about getting from one place to another, Xavier continued. It's about who we sit beside, how we treat them, and what we learn when we stop assuming and start listening. He turned and extended his hand to his mother, inviting her on stage. When Olivia walked into the spotlight, a full standing ovation met her. She didn't smile for the cameras or raise her fist in victory. She simply bowed her head in quiet gratitude. Taking the mic, her voice was calm, measured, and resonant. I'm not a hero. I'm just a woman who got tired of being ignored, and I know I'm not alone. For every Olivia out there who never had the chance to speak up, know this: your dignity is not defined by what others see in you, but by how you carry yourself, even when no one sees you at all. She paused, scanning the crowd. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unworthy, don't give up. Change is slow, but it's real. I've seen it. I've lived it. The room remained silent, reverent. And then she looked straight into the camera. And if this story moved you even just a little, share it. Talk about it. Don't let it end with applause. Let it start with action. That night, as the conference livestream went viral, Olivia's story was retweeted, reshared, and rewatched by millions. People who had never flown with Summit now saw it as a model of what corporations could and should be. And it didn't stop with one airline. Other industries, hospitality, tech, healthcare, began to study Summit's blueprint. Real change was happening, not because of rules, but because of one woman's refusal to stay silent. Olivia Carter's journey wasn't just a fight for her own dignity. It was the beginning of a movement. Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice based on how someone looks, speaks, or dresses? Share your story in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation. And if Olivia's story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us as we keep telling stories that matter.